George Strait gives his wife a touching gift, and what she did next moved everyone. The stage lights dimmed at the American Airlines Center in Dallas as 60,000 voices fell silent, waiting for the man they called the King of Country to take his final bow. George Strait adjusted his black cowboy hat, the same style he had worn for over 4 decades, and stepped into the spotlight that had illuminated his extraordinary journey from a small town in Texas to becoming the most successful country artist in history. With 60 #1 hits under his belt and a legacy that had shaped an entire generation of music lovers, George had seen it all, done it all, and conquered every mountain the music industry had to offer. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of 54 years of marriage pressed against his chest like a secret too heavy to carry alone. In the VIP section, barely visible behind the curtained area reserved for family, sat the woman who had been his anchor through every storm, every triumph, and every heartbreak that life had thrown their way. Norma Strait, now 73 years old, clutched her purse with the same gentle hands that had held their children, wiped away his tears, and applauded from countless backstage areas, while her husband claimed victory after victory in the spotlight she had never sought for herself. The crowd erupted as George launched into Amarillo Morning, his voice as smooth and reliable as aged whiskey, carrying across the arena with the same power that had captivated audiences since 1971. But his eyes kept drifting to that VIP section, to the woman whose quiet strength had made every song possible, every dream achievable, every day worth living. Most people in that arena knew George Strait, the performer, the legend, the man who could sell out stadiums with a single announcement. Few knew George Harvey Strait, the husband, the father who had buried his 13-year-old daughter Jennifer after a tragic car accident in 1986, the man who had spent the last 2 years watching his beloved wife fight a battle that no amount of fame or fortune could influence. The irony was not lost on him that a man who had built his career on singing about love, loss, and the simple truths of life had spent decades keeping his deepest truths locked away from the very people who had supported him. George had always been different from other country stars. While others courted controversy and tabloid headlines, he had maintained an almost mystical privacy, rarely giving interviews about his personal life and never exploiting his family's tragedies for sympathy or publicity. When Jennifer died, he had grieved privately, channeling his pain into his music without ever explicitly telling the world about the hole in his heart that would never fully heal. Now, as he transitioned seamlessly into Check Yes or No, a song that never failed to make audiences smile and sing along, George felt the weight of a decision that had been building for months. The small velvet box in his jacket pocket seemed to burn against his chest, containing not just a piece of jewelry but a symbol of everything he and Norma had endured together. The music that filled the arena tonight was the soundtrack of their love story, each song a chapter in a romance that had begun when they were teenagers in high school, continued through the struggles of his early career, survived the devastating loss of their daughter, and now faced its greatest test yet. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling moved by the power of enduring love, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your own experiences with love that has stood the test of time, and please let us know where you're watching from around the world. Your stories inspire us to continue sharing these powerful moments that remind us what truly matters in life. George Harvey Strait Jr. had never intended to become the king of country music. Born in Petite, Texas in 1952, he had grown up with simple dreams and simpler pleasures. His father, John Byron Strait Sr., was a junior high school mathematics teacher who instilled in his son the values of hard work, humility, and treating people with respect, regardless of their station in life. These lessons would prove invaluable as George navigated the treacherous waters of the music industry, maintaining his reputation as one of the most genuine and down-to-earth superstars in any genre. It was during his high school years in Pearsall, Texas, that George first laid eyes on Norma Voss, a pretty girl with kind eyes and a laugh that could make him forget whatever troubles were weighing on his teenage mind. She was different from the other girls who seemed impressed by his growing reputation as a musician. Norma saw past the guitar and the slowly building local fame to the young man underneath, the one who worried about his grades, helped his father with ranch work, and dreamed of a life that extended beyond the boundaries of their small town. Their courtship was the stuff of country songs, filled with Friday night football games, drives down dusty back roads, and conversations that stretched long into the night about dreams they were almost afraid to speak aloud. George would bring his guitar to their dates, playing songs under the Texas stars, while Norma listened with the patience and attention that would characterize her support of his career for the next 5 decades. She never asked for the spotlight, never demanded to be the center of attention, content to be his audience of one, his most trusted critic, and eventually his wife. They married on December 4, 1971, in a small ceremony that reflected their shared values of simplicity and sincerity. George was 19, Norma was 20, and they were both convinced that love could conquer anything the world might throw at them. The early years tested that conviction repeatedly as George struggled to establish himself in the music industry, playing honky-tonk bars and small venues while working various jobs to support his growing family. Jennifer Lynn Strait was born in 1972, followed by George Harvey Strait III, known as Bubba, in 1981. Through those lean years, Norma was the steady presence that kept their family grounded. While George chased his musical dreams, often traveling for weeks at a time to play venues that barely paid enough to cover gas money, Norma managed their household, raised their children, and maintained an unwavering faith in her husband's talent and eventual success. She worked various jobs herself, from secretary positions to retail work, never complaining about the uncertainty of their financial situation or the loneliness of being married to a man whose dreams required him to be away from home so often. The breakthrough came in 1981 when George signed with MCA Records and released Unwound, which climbed to number 6 on the country charts. Success followed success, with Fool-Hearted Memory becoming his first #1 hit in 1982. As his star rose, George made a conscious decision that would define both his career and his marriage. Norma and the children would remain his priority, and fame would never be allowed to corrupt the values they had built their life upon. This decision manifested in ways both large and small. Unlike many country stars who relocated to Nashville to be closer to the industry machinery, George and Norma chose to remain in Texas, building their dream home on a ranch outside San Antonio. The children attended local schools, participated in normal activities, and were raised with the understanding that their father's fame was his job, not their identity. Family dinners were sacred, and George made it clear to his management and record label that certain times were off limits for business calls or meetings. But fame, no matter how carefully managed, brings its own set of challenges. As George's career reached stratospheric heights with hits like Oceanfront Property, All My Exes Live in Texas, and King of the Road, the family found themselves dealing with increased media attention and public scrutiny. Norma, by nature a private person, had to adjust to a life where simple trips to the grocery store might result in photographs in tabloid magazines or well-meaning but intrusive questions from strangers about her husband's career. The most devastating test of their marriage came on June 25, 1986, when their 13-year-old daughter Jennifer was killed in a car accident in San Marcos, Texas. The loss shattered both George and Norma in ways that no amount of success or money could heal. For George, who had built his career on singing about life's joys and sorrows, the death of his daughter was a pain so profound that it threatened to silence his voice forever. In the aftermath of Jennifer's death, many expected George to take an extended break from his career, perhaps even retire permanently to grieve with his family. Instead, with Norma's quiet encouragement, he chose to channel his grief into his music, using his platform to honor Jennifer's memory while helping other parents who had faced similar losses. The couple established a memorial fund in Jennifer's name, but they did so quietly without fanfare or publicity, consistent with their approach to handling both triumph and tragedy with dignity. The years that followed Jennifer's death saw some of George's most powerful and emotionally resonant performances. Songs like Baby Blue and You Look So Good in Love took on deeper meanings when delivered by a man who truly understood the fragility of happiness and the preciousness of family bonds. Norma remained his constant companion through this period, attending concerts when she could, while maintaining their home as a sanctuary where George could retreat from the public eye and simply be a husband and father to their surviving son. As George's career entered its 4th decade, he and Norma had settled into a rhythm that worked for both of them. He continued to tour and record, but at a more measured pace that allowed for extended periods at home. Their son Bubba had grown into a successful businessman in his own right, and they had been blessed with grandchildren who brought new joy and purpose to their lives. To the outside world, George and Norma Strait appeared to have achieved that rarest of achievements in the entertainment industry, a marriage that had not only survived fame, but had been strengthened by it. But life, as George knew better than most, has a way of testing even the strongest foundations when you least expect it. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 2 years before that fateful night in Dallas. George was in his home studio working on arrangements for what would become his latest album, when he heard Norma's voice from the kitchen, strained and careful in the way that meant she was trying not to alarm him. "George, honey, could you come here for a minute?" The tone was one he had learned to recognize over 5 decades of marriage, the same controlled calm she had used when calling to tell him about Jennifer's accident, the same measured strength she employed whenever life demanded they face something together that neither of them wanted to confront alone. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Norma's physician of 15 years, had requested that both George and Norma come to her office that afternoon to discuss the results of routine blood work that had been conducted during Norma's annual physical 3 weeks earlier. The word routine had taken on an ominous quality during the drive to the medical center, as both George and Norma knew that doctors rarely requested spousal presence for truly routine matters. They held hands in the waiting room, surrounded by the sterile smell of disinfectant and the muted conversations of other couples who were also waiting to hear news that might change their lives forever. Dr. Hernandez, a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that both George and Norma had always appreciated, did not waste time with pleasantries when they entered her office. The test results, spread across her desk like a roadmap to an unwanted destination, told a story that she had clearly rehearsed but still struggled to deliver with the right balance of medical objectivity and human compassion. Norma had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer that had likely been developing silently for months before manifesting in the subtle symptoms she had attributed to normal aging: fatigue that wasn't relieved by rest, occasional nausea she blamed on something she had eaten, a general sense of not feeling quite right that she had dismissed as the natural consequence of being 71 years old. The oncologist who joined them 20 minutes later, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, was younger than George had expected, but carried himself with the confident precision of someone who had delivered both devastating news and miraculous recoveries with equal professionalism. The statistics he presented were stark and unforgiving. This particular type of cancer had a 30% 5-year survival rate, and that was with aggressive treatment that would include chemotherapy, radiation, and possibly surgery, depending on how the tumor responded to the initial interventions. Without treatment, Dr. Rodriguez explained with clinical honesty, they were looking at months rather than years. George felt the familiar sensation he had experienced only a few times in his life, the feeling that the ground beneath his feet had suddenly become unreliable, that the world he thought he understood had shifted into something foreign and threatening. It was the same disorienting sensation he had felt when the phone rang with news of Jennifer's accident, the same vertigo that had accompanied his father's sudden death from a heart attack in 1996. But this was different because Norma was sitting right there beside him, still warm and alive and real, still the same woman who had made his coffee that morning and reminded him to take his blood pressure medication, still his anchor in a life that had been blessed with more success and joy than any one man deserved. Norma's reaction was characteristically practical and selfless. Her first questions were not about her own prognosis or treatment options, but about how this would affect George's upcoming tour dates and recording commitments. She had spent 53 years putting his career and their family's well-being ahead of her own concerns, and even facing a life-threatening diagnosis, her instinct was to minimize the disruption her illness might cause to the lives of the people she loved. George watched his wife calmly take notes as Dr. Rodriguez explained treatment schedules and side effects, marveling at her strength, while simultaneously feeling his own resolve begin to crystallize around a single, non-negotiable priority. The drive home was conducted in the peculiar silence that follows life-altering news, when normal conversation feels inadequate and profound declarations seem premature. George's mind raced through a mental catalogue of upcoming commitments, a 3-month tour that was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, studio sessions for a Christmas album that was already behind schedule, a television special that had been in planning stages for over a year. Each obligation now felt like a betrayal of the woman sitting beside him, whose needs suddenly outweighed every contract, every promise to promoters and fans, every aspect of the career that had defined his adult life. That evening, George made the first of many phone calls that would reshape the next 2 years of his life. His manager of 28 years, Irv Woolsey, listened without interruption as George explained the situation and announced his decision to clear his calendar indefinitely. There would be no tour, no television special, no recording sessions that couldn't be postponed or relocated to accommodate Norma's treatment schedule. For the first time in his career, George Strait was stepping back from the spotlight not because of creative burnout or industry politics, but because something more important than music needed his attention. The conversation with Irv revealed the depth of respect and affection that the music industry had for George, as his manager immediately began the complex process of rescheduling commitments without revealing the personal reasons behind the changes. Press releases were crafted with careful language about family obligations and health concerns, without specifying whose health was at stake or providing details that might invite unwanted media attention. Promoters who had sold hundreds of thousands of tickets were remarkably understanding when offered the choice of postponement or cancellation with full refunds, a testament to the goodwill George had built over decades of reliable professionalism. Norma began chemotherapy 3 weeks after the diagnosis, and George kept his promise to be present for every treatment session, every doctor's appointment, every moment when his wife needed him to be not the king of country music, but simply the man who had loved her since they were teenagers. He learned the names of nurses, became familiar with the rhythms of the oncology ward, and developed a deep appreciation for the community of patients and families who were fighting similar battles with courage that rivaled anything he had witnessed in his years of performing for audiences around the world. The treatments were brutal, in ways that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. Norma, who had maintained her youthful energy and appearance well into her 70s, began to show the physical toll of chemotherapy within weeks of starting the regimen. Her hair, which she had always worn in the same elegant style that George had fallen in love with in high school, began to thin and eventually required the purchase of wigs that never quite looked right to either of them. The nausea was constant and unpredictable, making it impossible for her to maintain the active lifestyle that had always been her preference. George found himself taking on domestic responsibilities that Norma had managed effortlessly for decades: grocery shopping, meal planning, coordinating with housekeeping staff, managing their social calendar around treatment schedules. These tasks, which might have seemed mundane to an outside observer, became acts of devotion that connected him to his wife's daily experience in ways that performing on stage had never prepared him for. He discovered that there was a different kind of performance required in being a caregiver, one that demanded consistency, patience, and the ability to project strength even when feeling helpless. The lowest point came during the 4th month of treatment, when a scan revealed that the tumor had not responded, as well as the medical team had hoped. Dr. Rodriguez, maintaining his professional demeanor while clearly disappointed by the results, explained that they would need to switch to a more aggressive treatment protocol that carried higher risks and more severe side effects. The new chemotherapy regimen would require Norma to be hospitalized for several days each month, and the radiation treatments would be daily for 6 weeks, with no guarantee that this approach would be more successful than the first. It was during one of those hospital stays, as George sat in the uncomfortable chair beside Norma's bed and watched her sleep fitfully under the influence of medications designed to combat both the cancer and the side effects of treatment, that he made a discovery that would change everything. Norma's purse, sitting on the bedside table, had fallen open, revealing the contents that she carried with her everywhere: reading glasses, breath mints, a small notepad where she kept track of appointments, and a small velvet jewelry box that he had not seen in years. George opened the box carefully, not wanting to invade his wife's privacy, but curious about what she considered important enough to carry with her during this difficult time. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded satin, was her original wedding ring from their 1971 ceremony. Not the expensive diamond band he had bought her when his career took off, but the simple gold band they had purchased with their combined savings when they were young and in love and convinced that love was enough to overcome any obstacle life might present. The ring was broken, the band cracked in 2 places from decades of wear, and the activities of raising children, managing a household, and supporting a husband whose career demands had sometimes required her to be both mother and father to their kids. George remembered the day she had stopped wearing it, sometime in the late 80s when the breaks had become too pronounced to ignore, and the jeweler had recommended replacement rather than repair. He had bought her the diamond band as a symbol of their success, but she had kept the original, the one that represented who they were before fame complicated their lives, the one that had been blessed by their young love and their simple dreams. Looking at that broken ring, sitting in a hospital room while his wife fought for her life, George felt something crystallize in his mind, not just a plan, but a purpose that went beyond the medical treatments and the statistics and the uncertainty that had dominated their lives for months. He was going to find a way to honor not just their marriage, but the journey they had traveled together, the love that had survived fame and tragedy and now faced its ultimate test. The broken ring would be restored, but more than that, it would become the centerpiece of a gesture that would tell their story in a way that no song ever could. As Norma stirred awake and smiled at him with the same warmth that had captured his heart 53 years earlier, George knew that he was about to embark on the most important project of his life. The next morning, after Norma had been discharged and was resting comfortably at home with their housekeeper Maria keeping watch, George drove to downtown San Antonio with the broken wedding ring carefully wrapped in tissue paper in his jacket pocket. His destination was a small jewelry shop on South Alamo Street that he had passed countless times over the years but never entered. Castillo Fine Jewelry, owned by Ricardo Castillo, a master craftsman whose reputation for restoring antique pieces had made him something of a legend among collectors and historians in South Texas. Ricardo, a man in his 60s with weathered hands that spoke of decades working with precious metals, listened intently as George explained what he wanted to accomplish. The ring needed to be more than repaired, George explained. It needed to be transformed into something that honored both its original meaning and the journey it had witnessed. He wanted to incorporate the original gold into a new design that would include stones representing their children and grandchildren, creating a piece that told the story of their family while maintaining the spiritual connection to their young love that the original ring embodied. The technical challenges were significant, Ricardo explained, as he examined the broken band under a magnifying glass. The gold was worn thin in several places, and the cracks had created weak points that would make traditional repair methods unreliable. However, he continued with the enthusiasm of an artist presented with an inspiring challenge. The original metal could be melted down and combined with new gold to create a stronger foundation while preserving the essence of the original ring. The process would take several weeks and would require George to trust him with something irreplaceable, but Ricardo believed they could create something extraordinary. Over the following days, George found himself thinking about more than just the ring. The gesture needed to be complete, he realized, something that captured not just their current situation, but the entire arc of their relationship. That's when he remembered the song, a melody he had written during their senior year of high school, but had never recorded, never performed publicly, never even played for Norma since those early days when he was still learning to be a songwriter, and she was his most patient and encouraging audience. The song, which he had called Norma Jean My Queen in his teenage romanticism, had been inspired by their first official date, a school dance where she had worn a blue dress that made her eyes look like sapphires and had danced with him to every slow song while he tried not to step on her feet. The lyrics, written with the earnest passion that only teenage love can inspire, described how he had known from that very first dance that she would be his wife, how her smile had made him believe in fairy tales, how her laugh had become the soundtrack of his dreams. George retrieved the yellowed notebook from a box in his study, finding the song exactly where he had left it 46 years earlier, the handwriting still recognizable as his own, despite the decades that had passed. Reading the lyrics now with the perspective of someone who had actually lived the fairy tale he had written about, he was struck by how prophetic some of the lines had been. When the storms come calling and the world gets rough, I'll hold you close, and love will be enough. Words written by a 17-year-old boy who could never have imagined the storms they would actually face, but who had somehow understood that love would indeed be their shelter. The challenge now was arranging the song in a way that honored both its youthful origins and the mature love it was meant to celebrate. George contacted Danny Flowers, a longtime collaborator and arranger who had worked on some of his most successful albums, and explained what he wanted to accomplish. The song needed to feel intimate and personal, not like a polished studio production, but like a serenade performed by a man who was singing directly to the woman he loved. Danny suggested a string quartet arrangement with minimal instrumentation. Just George's voice, an acoustic guitar, and 4 string players who could provide the elegant backdrop that such a moment deserved. Finding the right musicians proved easier than expected. When George explained the nature of the project to potential performers, he discovered that his reputation for integrity and genuine character had created a network of professionals who were honored to be part of something so personal and meaningful. The string quartet he ultimately selected consisted of musicians from the San Antonio Symphony who volunteered their time not because of his celebrity status, but because they were moved by the love story they were being asked to help tell. Meanwhile, the medical news had begun to improve. Dr. Rodriguez reported that Norma was responding better to the new treatment protocol than anyone had dared to hope. The tumor markers in her blood work were declining steadily, and the latest scans showed significant shrinkage in the primary mass. While he cautioned that they were not yet at the point where they could declare victory, the trend was encouraging enough to begin discussing longer-term survival possibilities. The 30% survival rate that had seemed so daunting 6 months earlier was beginning to feel less like a death sentence and more like a challenge that Norma was determined to overcome. George watched his wife regain some of her strength and energy as the treatments continued, marveling at her resilience and her determination to maintain as normal a life as possible despite the circumstances. She had insisted on continuing to cook dinner whenever she felt well enough, had resumed tending to the small garden behind their house, and had even begun talking about planning their next family gathering for Thanksgiving. Her hair had begun to grow back, still thin but recognizably hers, and the color had returned to her cheeks in a way that made George remember why he had fallen in love with her smile all those years ago. It was during this period of cautious optimism that Ricardo called to announce that the ring was ready. George drove to the jewelry shop with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, knowing that what waited for him there would either perfectly capture what he was trying to express or would fall short of the vision that had sustained him through months of planning and anticipation. Ricardo's smile when George entered the shop told him everything he needed to know before he even saw the finished piece. The new ring was extraordinary in its elegant simplicity. The original gold had been transformed into a band that was both stronger and more beautiful than the original, with a subtle texture that caught the light in ways that seemed to make the metal itself glow with warmth. Set into the band were 5 small stones, a sapphire for Norma herself, diamonds for George, Jennifer, and their son Bubba, and an emerald for their newest grandchild, with space left for additional stones as their family continued to grow. The overall effect was sophisticated, but not ostentatious, timeless but clearly contemporary, a piece that honored the past while looking forward to the future they were fighting to preserve. The secret rehearsals for the song took place in a small studio outside San Antonio, with George and the string quartet working together to create an arrangement that felt both professional and intimate. The musicians quickly understood what George was trying to accomplish and contributed ideas that enhanced the emotional impact of the piece without overwhelming its essential simplicity. The violin would carry the melody during an instrumental bridge. The cello would provide a foundation that emphasized the song's romantic themes, and the viola and second violin would add harmonic textures that made the whole arrangement feel like a musical embrace. As word of George's temporary withdrawal from touring had spread through the industry, speculation about his reasons had ranged from creative burnout to secret illness to retirement planning. His management team had done an excellent job of deflecting inquiries without providing details, but the absence of one of country music's most reliable performers had not gone unnoticed by fans or media. George knew that when he eventually returned to public performances, there would be questions about where he had been and why he had stepped away at what appeared to be the height of his career. The idea for the public reveal had come to him gradually, emerging from conversations with Norma about how their experience might be helpful to other families facing similar challenges. She had mentioned during one of their evening talks how isolated she had felt during the early weeks of treatment, how she had wished for stories of hope from other women who had survived similar diagnoses. The statistics and medical information were helpful, she said, but what she had really needed was evidence that it was possible to maintain love, dignity, and purpose while fighting for your life. George began to envision a moment that would accomplish multiple goals simultaneously, honoring his wife publicly for the first time in their marriage, sharing their story in a way that might inspire other families, and creating a memory that would belong to them regardless of what the future might hold. The upcoming concert in Dallas, already sold out and scheduled to be one of the last shows of what many assumed would be his farewell tour, seemed like the perfect venue for such a moment. The plan that began to take shape in George's mind was both simple and audacious. He would interrupt the concert at its emotional peak, invite Norma to join him on stage for the first time in over 50 years of marriage, and share their story with the 60,000 people who had supported his career and, by extension, their family through all the ups and downs of their journey together. He would present her with the restored ring, perform the song he had written for her when they were young, and create a moment that would demonstrate to the world the kind of love that had sustained them through everything life had thrown their way. But as the date of the Dallas concert approached, George realized that his plan would require something he had never done before in his professional career: complete vulnerability in front of an audience that knew him only as a performer, not as a man who had spent the last 2 years watching his wife fight for her life. The American Airlines Center, on the night of October 15th, felt electric with anticipation in a way that even George, veteran of thousands of performances, found remarkable. 60,000 fans had gathered not just for a concert, but for what many believed might be their final opportunity to see the king of country music perform live. The rumors about his potential retirement had been circulating for months, fueled by his extended absence from touring and the cryptic statements from his management about personal priorities and family time. The energy in the arena carried the weight of collective farewell, with multiple generations of families who had grown up listening to George Strait's music coming together to witness what felt like the end of an era. Backstage, George stood before the mirror in his dressing room, adjusting the black cowboy hat that had become his trademark while trying to calm the nervousness that threatened to overwhelm him. In all his years of performing, from the smallest honky-tonk bars to the largest stadiums in the world, he had never felt the kind of anxiety that gripped him now. The velvet ring box in his jacket pocket felt impossibly heavy, and the song lyrics he had memorized decades ago suddenly seemed foreign and uncertain in his mind. This was not stage fright in any conventional sense. This was the fear of a man about to reveal his deepest emotions to strangers, to trust an audience with the most precious part of his life. Norma sat quietly in the VIP area that had been specially arranged for their family, looking beautiful in a deep blue dress that George had chosen because it reminded him of the one she had worn to their first dance in high school. Her hair, still shorter than she preferred but growing steadily thicker as the effects of chemotherapy faded, was styled in a way that gave her face a youthful glow that made George remember why he had fallen in love with her smile all those years ago. She had no idea what her husband was planning, believing that she was simply there to support him during what she assumed would be an emotional farewell performance. The first hour of the concert proceeded according to the carefully planned set list that George and his band had rehearsed for weeks. He performed all the crowd favorites: Amarillo Morning, Oceanfront Property, Check Yes or No, All My Exes Live in Texas, watching the audience sing along with the enthusiasm and joy that had made his career so personally rewarding. Between songs, he found his eyes drifting repeatedly to the VIP section, where Norma sat with their son Bubba and their grandchildren, all of them enjoying the show with the easy familiarity of a family that had attended hundreds of such performances over the decades. But as the evening progressed and the moment he had planned for approached, George felt his resolve wavering in ways he had not anticipated. The audience before him represented millions of fans who had supported his music for over 4 decades, but they were also strangers who had no claim on his private grief, no right to witness his most intimate emotions. Norma had always valued her privacy, had chosen deliberately to remain in the background while he claimed the spotlight, and he wondered if what he was about to do constituted a betrayal of the very qualities that had made her such a perfect partner for his unconventional life. The turning point came during I Cross My Heart, the romantic ballad that had become one of his most requested songs at weddings and anniversaries across the country. As he sang the familiar words about love that lasts forever and promises that will never be broken, George looked directly at Norma and saw her singing along softly, her lips moving with lyrics she had heard him perform thousands of times, but which had taken on new meaning during the months when they had not known if they would have forever together. In that moment, he realized that what he was about to do was not about the audience at all. It was about honoring a woman who deserved to be celebrated publicly for all the ways she had made his success possible. The song ended to thunderous applause, and instead of launching immediately into the next number as the audience expected, George stepped closer to the microphone and raised his hand for quiet. The arena, sensing that something unusual was happening, fell silent with the kind of anticipation that comes when 60,000 people collectively hold their breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," George began, his voice carrying across the vast space with the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding such audiences, "I need to share something with you tonight that I've kept private for too long." The confession that followed was unlike anything George had ever done in his professional life. Speaking with the halting honesty of a man unaccustomed to public vulnerability, he told the audience about Norma's diagnosis 2 years earlier, about the terrifying statistics and the months of uncertainty, about his decision to step away from performing so that he could be present for the woman who had made every song, every success, every moment of joy in his career possible. He spoke about the 30% survival rate that had felt like a death sentence, about watching his wife endure treatments that tested her strength and his faith, about the love that had sustained them through their darkest hours. As George spoke, the cameras that were documenting the concert for a planned DVD release captured something unprecedented, an arena full of people who had come for entertainment but found themselves witnessing something far more profound. Faces throughout the audience showed the recognition that comes when strangers realize they are being trusted with something sacred, when the artificial boundaries between performer and audience dissolve in the presence of genuine human emotion. Many were already crying, moved not just by George's words but by the courage it required for such a private man to share such personal pain. "This woman," George continued, his voice growing stronger as he looked directly at Norma, "has been my strength for 54 years. When the doctors told us she might not be here for our next anniversary, I made a promise to God and to myself that if she recovered, I would show the world what she means to me." He paused, gesturing toward the VIP section where Norma sat with her hands pressed to her mouth in surprise and emotion. "Norma Strait, would you please come up here with me?" The walk from the VIP section to the stage felt eternal to both George and Norma, with every step captured by cameras and witnessed by 60,000 people who understood they were seeing something that would never happen again. Norma, who had spent over 5 decades avoiding exactly this kind of public attention, moved with the grace and dignity that had characterized her approach to everything in life, accepting the assistance of security personnel who helped her navigate the stairs to the stage level, while maintaining the composure that came from a lifetime of supporting her husband through every conceivable situation. When she finally reached George's side, standing in front of an audience larger than the population of most cities, Norma looked exactly as she always had during their private moments, calm, supportive, completely focused on her husband rather than on the spectacle surrounding them. George took her hand, feeling the familiar comfort of her touch, even in this most unusual of circumstances, and turned to face the audience that was now completely silent, waiting to see what would happen next. "I wrote a song for this woman when we were in high school," George announced, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. "I never recorded it, never performed it publicly because it was too personal, too much ours to share with anyone else. But tonight, after everything we've been through together, I want the world to hear what I felt about her then, and what I feel about her now." He signaled to the side of the stage, where the string quartet he had secretly rehearsed with for weeks took their positions with the quiet professionalism of musicians who understood the significance of the moment they were helping to create. The opening notes of "Norma Jean, My Queen" floated across the arena with a delicate beauty that seemed almost fragile in such a vast space. George's voice, when it joined the strings, carried all the vulnerability and authenticity that had been missing from his public persona for decades. The lyrics, written by a 17-year-old boy in love, took on profound meaning when delivered by a 72-year-old man who had lived every word of the promises he had made in song all those years ago. "When the storms come calling and the world gets rough, I'll hold you close and love will be enough." Words that had proven prophetic in ways their teenage author could never have imagined. As the song built to its emotional climax, George reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the small velvet box that contained Ricardo Castillo's masterpiece. Norma's gasp when she opened it and saw the transformed wedding ring was audible through the microphone, and her tears as George slipped it onto her finger created one of those perfect moments that no amount of planning or professional production could have orchestrated. The audience, witnessing this most intimate of gestures being shared with them, responded with applause that seemed to come not from entertainment, but from genuine joy at being allowed to witness such authentic love. But the evening's most powerful moment was yet to come. As the applause died down, and George prepared to continue with the planned conclusion of his presentation, Norma stepped closer to the microphone with the determination of someone who had found her voice at exactly the right moment. For 54 years, Norma Strait had been content to let her husband claim the spotlight while she provided the steady foundation that made his extraordinary career possible. She had attended countless award shows, industry events, and private gatherings, where her role was to smile graciously, deflect attention, and ensure that the focus remained on George's accomplishments rather than on her own contributions to their shared success. But standing on that stage in Dallas, wearing the restored wedding ring that represented everything they had endured together, she felt a clarity of purpose that surprised her with its intensity. "I've never spoken into a microphone in my life," Norma began, her voice soft but clear as it carried across the suddenly silent arena. "George has always been the one with the words, the one who could make people feel something with his voice. But tonight, I need to say something that I've never said publicly, and I need all of you to hear it." She paused, looking out at 60,000 faces that were focused entirely on her, many of them streaming with tears as they witnessed a woman finding her courage in the most public way possible. "My husband told you about my illness, about how scared we were, about the statistics that made us think we might not have much time left together. What he didn't tell you is that during those darkest months, when I was too sick to get out of bed, when I couldn't keep food down, when I wondered if I would ever feel like myself again, George would sit beside me and sing." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, drawing strength from the story she was telling, and the audience that was hanging on every word. "Not for crowds like this, not for recording contracts or awards or any of the reasons he usually sings. He would sing the old songs we used to listen to when we were dating, lullabies he used to sing to our children, hymns his mother taught him when he was little. He would sing until I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, scared and sick, he would start singing again. That's the man you think you know from his records and his concerts, but that's the man I've known for 54 years, someone who uses his gift not for fame or money, but to heal the people he loves." The arena remained absolutely silent, except for Norma's voice and the occasional sound of someone in the audience crying quietly. George stood beside his wife, his own eyes filled with tears, as he listened to her describe a side of their private struggle that he had never intended to share with anyone. But hearing her words, seeing the way the audience responded to her honesty and vulnerability, he realized that this moment had become something much larger than his original plan to honor their marriage. "But I want to tell you something else," Norma continued, her confidence growing with each word. "During my treatment, I met so many other families who were fighting the same battle we were fighting. Women my age who were scared they wouldn't see their grandchildren grow up. Husbands who didn't know how to help their wives through something so frightening. Children who were watching their parents suffer and feeling helpless to do anything about it. And I realized that George and I have been blessed with something that could help other people. Not just his music, but our story, our love, the proof that you can face anything when you have someone who will sit beside your bed and sing to you until the fear goes away." What happened next would be remembered as one of the most powerful moments in country music history. Norma asked for the arena lights to be turned up to full brightness, illuminating every section of the massive venue so that she could see the faces of everyone present. Then, in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had faced death and chosen to live, she made a request that transformed the entire event from a personal moment between husband and wife into a communal experience of healing and hope. "I want everyone in this arena who has fought cancer or who has supported someone fighting cancer to please stand up," Norma said. "Don't be embarrassed. Don't worry about what anyone thinks. Just stand up and let us see you, because you are the real heroes in this story." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Throughout the arena, people began rising from their seats, slowly at first, then in growing numbers, as individuals found the courage to identify themselves publicly with a struggle that had touched nearly every family represented in the audience. Children stood up for parents who had battled the disease. Spouses rose to honor partners who were no longer with them. Survivors claimed their victories by simply standing and being counted among the community of people who understood what the Strait family had endured. Within minutes, nearly half the arena was on its feet, creating a visual representation of cancer's reach that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The sight of so many people willing to acknowledge their connection to this disease, to stand in solidarity with strangers who shared their experience, created an emotional atmosphere that transcended entertainment and entered the realm of genuine human connection. George, witnessing this spontaneous demonstration of community and courage, felt compelled to respond in the only way he knew how. Without any rehearsal or planning, he began to sing "I Cross My Heart" again, but this time not as a performance but as a prayer, a blessing, a promise to everyone standing in that arena that love really could be enough to sustain people through their darkest hours. His voice, strengthened by the emotion of the moment and the power of singing for people who needed his music in the most fundamental way, filled the arena with sound that felt less like entertainment and more like communion. As George sang, something remarkable happened throughout the venue. People began reaching for each other, strangers taking hands across aisles, families embracing, individuals who had been sitting alone finding themselves surrounded by others who understood their journey. The arena transformed from a concert venue into something closer to a cathedral, filled with people who had come expecting to hear familiar songs, but found themselves experiencing something much more profound. The moment stretched on for nearly 20 minutes, with George continuing to sing while Norma moved through different sections of the crowd that had gathered on the stage level, embracing cancer survivors, talking quietly with family members, and creating personal connections with people whose stories mirrored her own in countless ways. The professional cameras that had been documenting the concert captured every moment, but the real documentation was happening in the hearts and minds of people who knew they were witnessing something that would change how they understood both music and love. When the evening finally concluded, with George and Norma standing hand in hand while the audience gave them a standing ovation that lasted nearly 15 minutes, both of them knew that their lives had been fundamentally altered. The private struggle they had endured together had been transformed into a public testament to the power of love, commitment, and community support in facing life's greatest challenges. The video footage from that night was posted online within hours of the concert's conclusion, and the response was unprecedented. Within 3 days, the clips had been viewed over 50 million times across various social media platforms, shared by people who found in the Strait's story a source of hope, inspiration, and proof that authentic love stories still existed in a world that often seemed dominated by cynicism and superficiality. More importantly, the spontaneous demonstration of cancer survivors standing together in that Dallas arena sparked a movement that extended far beyond a single evening of music. Donations to cancer research organizations surged in the weeks following the concert, with over $2 million raised in the first week alone from people who had been moved by what they witnessed. Support groups formed in cities across the country, bringing together families who were facing similar battles and creating networks of mutual aid and emotional support. George and Norma, who had always preferred to handle their charitable giving privately, found themselves at the center of a phenomenon they had never intended to create. Rather than retreat from the unexpected attention, they chose to embrace their new role as advocates for cancer research and support for families facing similar diagnoses. They began making appearances at medical conferences, speaking at fundraising events, and sharing their story with audiences who needed to hear that survival was possible, that love could indeed sustain people through their darkest hours. The restored wedding ring that George had presented to Norma that night became a symbol that extended far beyond their personal story. Jewelry stores across the country began receiving requests from couples who wanted to create similar pieces that honored their own journeys through illness, loss, and recovery. The concept of incorporating meaningful elements from the past into new symbols of hope and commitment resonated with people who were looking for ways to honor their own stories of resilience and love. But perhaps the most lasting impact of that October night in Dallas was the way it changed George and Norma's understanding of their own relationship and its meaning to others. They had always known that their marriage was strong, that their love was real, that their commitment to each other was unshakable. What they discovered through sharing their story publicly was that their private joy had the power to heal others, that their personal triumph over adversity could serve as a beacon of hope for families facing similar challenges. 2 years later, as George and Norma celebrated their 56th wedding anniversary, they reflected on how that single evening in Dallas had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless people who had been touched by their story. Norma's health had continued to improve, with her most recent scans showing no evidence of cancer, and her energy returning to levels that amazed her medical team. George had returned to performing, but with a different sense of purpose, understanding that his music could serve not just as entertainment, but as a source of comfort and hope for people who needed reminding that love really could conquer fear. The broken wedding ring that had inspired George's grand gesture was now displayed in their home as a reminder of how something damaged could be transformed into something even more beautiful and meaningful. It served as a symbol of their marriage itself, tested by tragedy and illness, cracked by the pressures of fame and the demands of raising a family in the public eye, but ultimately made stronger and more precious by everything it had endured. On quiet evenings at their ranch outside San Antonio, George still sang to Norma the way he had during her illness, not because she needed the comfort anymore, but because the act of singing to the woman he loved had become one of his greatest sources of joy. And sometimes when the sunset was particularly beautiful, or when they were feeling especially grateful for the time they had been given together, Norma would ask him to sing "Norma Jean, My Queen," the song that had waited 46 years to find its perfect moment, the song that had helped transform a private love story into a public testament to the power of commitment, courage, and hope. Their story, which began with 2 teenagers falling in love at a high school dance in Texas, had become proof that fairy tales could survive in the real world, that love stories could have happy endings even when they included chapters filled with tragedy and fear. George Strait, the king of country music, had given his fans many gifts over the course of his legendary career, but perhaps the greatest gift was the example he and Norma provided of what it looked like when 2 people loved each other enough to face anything together and loved others enough to share their most precious moments with the world.